There is a certain kind of person who seems to be permanently waiting for their life to begin. They dream in wide, dramatic strokes. They see 1,000 possible futures for themselves. And they feel, more than anything else, a suffocating horror at the idea of being trapped. So when the moment finally comes to choose one path, one person, one version of themselves, something inside them quietly panics, and running away starts to feel easier than growing up. You might call this person lazy. You might call them a dreamer, or unreliable, or just not ready yet. But Carl Jung would call them something else, something older, something almost mythological. He would call them Puer Aeternus, the eternal boy. Tonight, we are going to open this archetype completely. We will look at where it comes from, how it disguises itself as freedom, how it quietly destroys relationships and careers from the inside, and, if you are honest enough to stay until the end, where it might be living inside you right now. The term Puer Aeternus is Latin. It means literally eternal child. Long before it was psychology, it was myth, the image of a youth who never ages, forever golden, forever unfinished, forever renewed. Carl Jung took this old image and gave it psychological weight. For Jung, the child is not simply a stage of life you pass through. It is an archetype, a deep pattern buried in what he called the collective unconscious. The child, as a symbol, represents the future, renewal, possibility. It is everything in you that has not yet been born. But every archetype, Jung warned, has two faces. The same energy that gives you creativity, spontaneity, and wonder can, if it never matures, curdle into something else entirely: regression, dependency, and a quiet refusal of reality. This is where the Puer Aeternus is born. He is the man who guards his youth like a treasure, but treats maturity like a trap. He loves beginnings. He fears continuation. He loves possibility. He fears choice. He loves freedom as an idea. He resents responsibility as a fact. He loves intensity. He cannot survive routine. The Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz, one of the sharpest interpreters of this archetype, described the inner world of the Puer with a phrase that should sting a little. She called it a provisional life. It is the sense that your real life has not started yet, that the present is only a rehearsal, never the actual performance. The current job is temporary. The current relationship isn't quite it. The current city is too small. The current version of your life is simply a waiting room for some greater existence, still somewhere out there, still approaching. But that greater existence never arrives. It cannot arrive because it would require the one thing the Puer fears at the deepest level of his psyche. It would require him to choose. Nowhere does this pattern reveal itself more painfully than in love. The Puer Aeternus does not fall in love with a person. He falls in love with the possibility of a person. He can idealize with astonishing intensity. He can convince himself completely that he has found something rare, a soulmate, a portal into a more authentic life, a rescue from his own unlived potential. But the moment the relationship asks for something concrete, presence, consistency, an uncomfortable conversation, a commitment that closes other doors, the spell breaks. What felt like magic starts to feel like suffocation. Because he was never really in love with her, or with him. He was in love with what they represented: transcendence, escape, a doorway out of his own unfinished life. The actual human being, with limits, moods, and contradictions, was never fully seen. So ordinary friction gets misread as proof the love has died, when in fact it is simply what every real bond requires in order to mature. He may live as though no relationship is ever quite the final one. There is always a quieter voice suggesting that somewhere else, a more intense story is waiting. And sometimes he does the opposite. He attaches himself to someone stable, someone structured, and lets that person quietly become the ground he stands on, the parent he never finished separating from, which breeds, eventually, both dependency and resentment. None of this makes the Puer purely destructive. He often brings real gifts into a relationship: spontaneity, imagination, romance, a genuine capacity for wonder. The danger isn't the energy itself. The danger is what happens when that energy never grows up. Here is the cruelest irony of the Puer Aeternus. He speaks endlessly about freedom. And yet look closely, and you often find a man who is deeply, structurally dependent on family, on a partner, on circumstance, on distraction, on the approval of others. He may reject the idea of dependency completely, but his actual autonomy never quite solidifies. He wants to fly, but he never builds the wings. He wants independence, but he avoids the concrete, unglamorous conditions that independence actually requires. He wants to be recognized, but he avoids the repetition, the unremarkable, uncelebrated repetition that recognition is built on. Before we go further, we need to be precise, because it would be far too easy to turn this archetype into cheap moral judgment. Not everyone who delays adulthood is a Puer Aeternus. Someone might still live with their parents because rent has become unaffordable. Someone might delay marriage or children because the economy underneath them is unstable. Someone might change careers repeatedly because the world of stable work no longer exists the way it once did. The passage into adult life is, for structural reasons, simply longer today than it was a generation ago. That is not psychology. That is economics. So the real question is never, does your life look conventional? The real question is this: is there suffering? Is there repetition? Is there avoidance disguised as freedom? Is there dependency you refuse to name? When the answer is yes, that is when the Puer is in command. To understand where this pattern actually comes from, we need to look at a deeper tension inside the psyche, the relationship between two archetypal forces, the Puer and its opposite, the Senex. Senex is Latin for old man. In Jungian thought, he represents structure, limit, discipline, law, time, responsibility. If the Puer says everything is still possible, the Senex answers, choose one possibility and give it form. The Senex at his best is wisdom, patience, the capacity to sustain a work, a relationship, a vocation, across years instead of moments. He is the force that turns inspiration into practice, desire into structure, promise into something real. But the Senex has a shadow of his own. Left unchecked, he curdles into rigidity, coldness, cynicism, excessive control, a fear of anything new. So, Puer without Senex becomes scattered fantasy, a life lived permanently in rehearsal, and Senex without Puer becomes sterile and rigid, a kind of symbolic death. The goal was never to kill the Puer, or to obey the Senex without question. The goal is integration. The Puer brings life, imagination, and the future. The Senex brings form, limit, and duration. Imagination needs form the way water needs a container. Without it, it simply spreads until it disappears. Desire needs responsibility, and the child inside you needs an adult inside you, one strong enough to protect it and honest enough to give it limits. It is easy to spot the Puer Aeternus in other people. The friend who never finishes anything. The partner who vanishes the moment things get serious. The man who talks endlessly about his grand plans and takes no concrete step toward any of them. That is the comfortable version of this conversation. The real confrontation begins with a different question. Not who does this, but where do I do this? You are probably not a Puer Aeternus in every part of your life. Almost no one is. But there may be one area, just one, where you remain permanently, eternally, just before the beginning. The project you keep saying you'll start once you feel more prepared. The conversation you keep avoiding because it might change everything. The choice you keep refusing to make because making it would mean giving up the fantasy that you could still become anyone at all. The Puer Aeternus fears one thing above all else: irreversibility. To choose is to become responsible for a shape. And when one shape is born, every other possible shape quietly dies with it. That is the grief he is not willing to feel. So he lives instead in the country of maybe. Maybe someday. Maybe when the timing is right. Maybe once I'm certain. But adult life almost never hands you certainty before the decision. In nearly every case, certainty is something that is built after the commitment, never before it. You do not discover who you are by thinking about it. You discover who you are by holding onto a choice after it has stopped being exciting. You discover what love actually is once the idealization wears off. You discover your real calling once the work becomes difficult and no one is watching. You discover your own strength on the day no one comes to organize your life for you. The Puer wants a life with no loss in it. But every real life is built out of loss. The loss of other possibilities. The loss of certain fantasies. The loss of the grandiose image of who you might have been. Even the loss of the comfortable identity of someone still preparing. Someone who hasn't failed yet, because they haven't truly tried yet either. Life does not begin the moment every possibility is secured. Life begins the moment you accept the loss of most possibilities so that you can finally, actually, inhabit one. You may not need another plan. You may not need one more reinvention, one more fresh start, one more perfect moment to wait for. What you may need is simply this: to give form to what you already know, to sustain a routine long enough for it to matter, to finish one single thing, to love someone once they stop being a projection, and start being a person. The Puer says, "One day I will be." Maturity answers quietly, "Then start being it now, small, imperfect, and real." Because life does not reward those who dream the biggest. It transforms those who are finally willing to wake up. If any part of tonight found something true in you, a project, a relationship, a version of yourself you keep postponing, leave a comment below with one word. The area of your life where you feel you are still living provisionally. Sometimes naming the pattern is the first step out of it. We are a sanctuary for those who think deeply. Until next time.